The state senator from ARAB contends the Alabama Education Association, in an effort to construct its own education policies, wants to take over the State Board of Education. McDonald claims AEA wants to do this by getting candidates elected to the board pledged to the association. The AEA says it's the democratic thing to do. McDonald said he's considering taking legal steps to challenge the $220 million capital outlay education bond issue recently passed by the state legislature. He claims it was not the intent of the legislature to borrow any more money. During the same news conference, McDonald challenged his opponent, Fob James, to an open and frank discussion of the problems facing state government. He says James doesn't have the answers.
My challenge and my assertion about Mr. James is that, yes, he's a good businessman, but he does not have the ability to translate the making of barbells and ping pong tables into the running of the governor's office. It is not that simple. Those who complain and dislike government must at the same time admit that it is a unique and technical bit of management to run it. Now, Mr. James is a credible man, and he's my friend, so surely he would not mind this offer. I think Mr. James and I should assemble all of the business community that has an interest, and anybody else, if we're the business candidates, and let's have, under rules that we agree to ahead of time, a frank and open discussion of what each of us perceive to be the problems in state government, and then, more importantly, what we would each do as governor to solve those problems. I don't believe Mr. James will meet with me and make that discussion for one simple reason. Mr. James does not know what to do about the state government. He has no issue. He has nothing but the most expensive television advertising program ever seen in this state. And I don't believe he will risk revealing that in conversation with somebody who knows the state government, who knows what's wrong with it, and how to cure it, as anybody in this race. But if he's to be a major candidate, it ought not to be just because of money. The governor's office is entirely too important for anybody to try to buy through slick advertising and no issues.
McDonald said he has not yet contacted James to offer his challenge personally. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Tonight, I respectfully submit to you for your consideration and approval the budget for the City of Montgomery as the City of Montgomery fiscal year 1978-79. This proposed budget of $39,984,225, containing $629,500 of reserves, is $3,109,353, or 8.43% above the 1977-78 approved budget. In this budget, I am proposing a 5.5% increase in pay for our city employees, with a minimum increase of $450 for each employee. If approved, this increase will be effective with the first pay period starting in the new fiscal year. In 1977, an initial attempt to recognize the fact that our police officers and our firefighters daily put their lives on the line to protect our citizens, hazardous duty pay of $25 a month to these employees was instituted. In this 1979 budget, I am recommending that this hazardous duty pay be continued and that it be increased by an additional $25 per month to each police officer and firefighter. In conclusion, the finances of the City of Montgomery are sound. It is my job as mayor to see that the taxpayers' money is wisely spent and the taxpayers get a dollar's worth of service for each tax dollar. I assure you that I and all the department heads and every city employee will give you the best that is in us to that end. This budget contains only those things that are necessary and affordable. It won't allow us to solve all the problems of the city, but it will provide us the tools to work towards solving them.
Although hinting to her campaign workers about a week ago she would withdraw from the governor's race, The 38-year-old Mrs. Wallace did not officially inform her workers of her decision until today. Efforts to contact the former First Lady at her home and at her campaign headquarters were unsuccessful. And later, in telephone conversation, she refused to be interviewed on camera, saying she wanted to stand on the prepared statement she had issued to the media. In that statement, Mrs. Wallace said she was unable to mount the kind of campaign effort to win the election for governor. She continued she has been encouraged to continue because of the positive response she received on the campaign trail, but she was running her campaign at her own expense and to continue without the help of friends who have not fulfilled their promises of financial help places a hardship on her personally. Said Mrs. Wallace, quote, "The Wallace factor has played a key role in my political involvement all the way through. The name change at this time without an open endorsement and active participation by the governor would be of little significance to me, considering all the other contributing factors." Prior to today's withdrawal, Mrs. Wallace tried to capitalize on the Wallace factor by seeking to have her name listed on the primary ballot as Mrs. George C. Wallace. She said the name change was recommended by the governor as a vote-getter. Mrs. Wallace, a surprise entry in the governor's race, said she thought about holding a news conference to make her announcement today, but then decided against it. She said she may elaborate on her decision to withdraw at a later time. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Harris's opponents charged that he is not a resident of District 80 and were successful in getting his name removed from the ballot following a hearing by the Democratic Executive Committee. Judge Perry Hooper overturned the decision and an appeal followed. Harris won that appeal today, and following the hearing, he said the whole event was unnecessary, but those are the games you have to play. Harris says the incumbent representative sees him as a threat and will do anything to keep him from the race.
I definitely feel there was a conspiracy. There was a small group of people who would much rather that I wasn't in the race because they're afraid if I run, I'll win. And if I win, I'm too big a threat to the old way things have been going, with 3 or 4 people running the show, making all the decisions, and they just want the people to be subservient to them, whereas I believe in doing things according to the way the people want them run and listening to the voice of the people, which I will do when I'm elected. And I'm a threat to them, and they don't want me in, and they'll stop at nothing, practically nothing, to get me out of the race. I'm very grateful that we won the victory in the court today, and we'll be on our way now campaigning until September 5th.
You mentioned a group of people. What does this group intake? What
You mean
people?
who are they?
Right.
I don't mind identifying them because from now on I'm letting it all hang out. It's Joe Reed, Paul Hubbard, Alvin Holmes, Frank Bray, and anybody else that they can use to keep things in line the way they want them. That's the group that wants me out of the way, off the scene. But the people, I think, want it otherwise, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to have it the way they want it.
Alvin Holmes has called a news conference tomorrow to discuss today's ruling. Janet May, WSFA TV News.
If high school football fans in South Alabama can tell you nothing else about the Andalusia Bulldogs this season, they'll tell you one thing: the Bulldogs will be good. Under head coach Don Sharp, Andalusia has not lost in 51 consecutive regular season games. Last year, including playoff games, Andalusia won 14 straight on the way to the Class 3A state championship. But defense could be a problem for Andalusia this season. Sharp must replace 8 defensive starters, and there's no doubt that's his primary concern.
We've got a long way to go, especially defensively. Offensively, we're looking pretty good. We've worked pretty hard offensively so far, but defensively, there's a lot of question marks.
Do you think there'll be any change in your defensive alignment this year?
We'll probably have to run a few more alignments than we ran last year. We stuck straight with the 50 defense last year, and we'll probably have to change that up a little bit this time.
Offensively, Andalusia returns 6 starters, including the entire backfield, so the Bulldogs are in good shape there. Inexperience on the line is the only question mark. But Sharp says the winning tradition at Andalusia should give the Bulldogs a slight edge. Dan O'Brien, WSFA TV Sports.
The guards assumed their posts shortly before 9 o'clock last night. They were armed with bayonets and riot helmets. Their orders were to allow no government officials to leave the base with any equipment from the abandoned facility. Mayor Smitherman said the guards would remain on rotating shifts 24 hours a day until a decision is rendered on a suit against the federal government, which the Selma City Council gave unanimous approval to the suit, which asks for complete control and ownership of the base. Smitherman said such extreme measures became necessary after a year of negotiations with the Defense Department failed to come up with a useful plan for the base. Smitherman said the brunt of the trouble with the government stemmed from two separate deeds to the land which the base is located on. The first deed, drawn up in 1948, included a clause stipulating complete reversion of the land ownership in the case the base was abandoned. The Air Force moved out of Craig last October. Smitherman said that the 1948 deed was, as required by law, approved by the state legislature. But another deed, which did not include a reversion clause, was drawn up 2 years later.
In 1950, now the act is used up once they chose one or the other vehicle. The council at that time chose the reversion clause by lease agreement where the land's reverted back. Then your act is null and void. To do anything else, you would have to pass another act. We never passed another act. In 1950, here's a deed where the city government, by resolution, deeded the whole thing to the Army Air Corps illegally. Not through anything they were thinking of doing. They probably were trying to save Craig Field. But it would have taken another enabling act of the legislature to have deeded this land to them.
Last spring, Mayor Smitherman made national headlines when he had the city fire trucks placed across the railroad tracks coming into the city. The mayor then said he was protesting what he considered to be substandard tracks going through the city. But at least in this instance, the Craig fire truck could not be used because the mayor says the government has taken control over it. From Craig Field in Selma, Dave Rickey, WSFA TV News.
And in the proposals in these so the purpose of this gathering is to get together and to unify Alabama leaders, business and political leaders, to join with other southeastern leaders to bring more pressure to bear to see that the southeastern states, and more particularly Alabama, is treated fairly.
What's the cause of this situation? Has the Northeast just got a better lobbying effort? How come we've ended up on the short end of the stick?
Well, you go back a few years in history and you will see that the Southeast used to produce practically all of the chairmen of the major committees in the House and in the Senate. And over a period of time, these leaders have either retired or have died, and some of our leadership is not there that used to be there, and filling this vacuum created by this have been a concentrated effort by the senators and the congressmen in the northeastern states, and they've probably just done a better job than we have. And so it's time now for the southeastern states to muster their forces and go back to work. I think there's also a regional jealousy that exists between the northeastern states and the southeast. As the comedian once says, nobody retires up north. And we see a great deal of industry leaving the northeast and coming throughout the southeastern states. And they're doing what they can to put a stop to this. And being an Alabamian, I want to do what I can to see that business and industry and jobs and so forth prosper in Alabama.
What have we got to do? Have we got to slowly wait until Alabama has regained some power up in the Capitol? We're going to put in 2 brand new fresh senators in Washington this coming election. Is that going to kind of leave us in a bad position?
No, I think of the candidates that we have, we'll have, out of that will come outstanding, outstanding leadership. I think we have a sound, solid congressional delegation. I think that that we just need to concentrate our efforts towards this. I can see that with Senator Sparkman retiring and Senator Allen's tragic and untimely death has left us not in as strong a position as we used to be, and many of the old Southern patriots have retired and are dead, such as Senator Russell from Georgia, Senator Eastland from Mississippi has announced his retirement. Others of this strength in the years are no longer with us. And the South used to be the favored region, no question about it. But now the worm is turning, and we want to be sure that that we're treated fairly in this. This is the purpose of this conference.
What does the South need right now?
Well, I think in Alabama's particular need is to make sure that we can provide a business climate to where businesses can locate in the state and compete nationwide successfully, so that we can create jobs in Montgomery and throughout this state, so that the people that are coming of job age will be able to find a job. That is the ultimate goal, to be able to keep our young people here in this state and the talent that we have. And I think that to do that, we're going to have to be able to keep this climate of industry well and alive, and that's what we're trying to do. And to do that, some of these urban grants that are being designed now favoring the northeastern states, and in my judgment, unfairly favoring them, need to be redirected so that the southeast, and more particularly Alabama, will be the beneficiary of it. As I say, Montgomery's case is clearly on point when we were turned down on this action grant for the drainage in North Montgomery, and it was strictly because the funds were all going to the northeastern states. Our application met every criteria. We had applied for an urban development action grant to solve a tremendous drainage problem we have in North Montgomery. Our grant qualified in every respect, but when it got down to it, the funds were not available for the simple reason that of the $150 million allocated for the urban development action grant, $100 million plus went to 16 northeastern states, and $48 million was divided up among 34 other states. So they favored the northeastern states in this, and a piece of legislation now before the Congress, the National Urban Policy, which will deal with some $32 billion, is being written deliberately, in our opinion, to favor the urban states or the northeastern states or the Frost Belt states at the expense of the southeastern states.
"56-year-old Ray Acton considers himself the most mature and experienced candidate for the office of Attorney General. Acton is conducting his campaign from his Montgomery home through telephone contacts, mail-outs, and personal appearances. The former Assistant Attorney General of Alabama has served as Executive Assistant to the Attorney General. He was a former Assistant U.S. Attorney and served as the Mayor of Homewood, Alabama. Acton says among his major goals as Attorney General would be to restore the people's faith and confidence in government.
Well, I think there are at least 4 valid reasons why people might, with confidence, vote for Ray Acton. First is that mine is the voice of experience and maturity. Secondly, I have a record of proven accomplishments, worthwhile things for the people of our state, unmatched by any of my opponents. Secondly, I think the office could and should be operated with courtesy, dignity, and above all else, perhaps, fairness. And thirdly, fourthly, I want to make some contribution toward restoring people's faith in government and public officials. And I would do this in part by setting an example of one man operating one department conservatively, and by pursuing those public officials in courthouses, state offices, city halls, who betray the public trust. I have no sympathy for any person who uses public office to feather his or her personal nest.
Acton, a University of Alabama graduate, is one of 9 Democrats seeking the office of Attorney General. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
For some 24 to 25 years, I've been the people.
As hot as it's been today, Bob, how come you suppose 4 weeks away from election, no one knows exactly who they're going to vote for?
It could be because of what you say. It's so hot. People have other thoughts on their minds, keeping cool rather than getting excited about an election. And if it's this hot on September the 5th, I'm convinced it's going to have a depressing effect on the voter turnout. And it is warm in beat 13 today.
What about the fact the election day is going to come one day after Labor Day?
I think it will have an impact. I think the Tuesday after Labor Day is just I use the word again, a depressing day. It's the end of summer and vacation. It's back to work. It's back to school. And coupled with the long weekend, the sunburns, the long trip back from the lake, maybe a hangover or two, I think it will have an impact. I think there will be a lighter turnout because of it.
All the talking we've been doing here in B13, almost everyone to a person said they don't know. It seems like, I mean, 3-4 weeks to an election, at least there'd be some more solid opinion than that.
I've been a little surprised that, and we've talked to a number of people up here this afternoon, that none of them, only one or two of the group have said they have made up their mind. And you're correct. It is getting awfully close to an election with people still undecided. I think perhaps the lack of a Wallace in the race to excite them, to bring out his supporters and anti-Wallace supporters that we've lived with for the past 16 years, I think they're just, maybe they're a little bored with what they see thus far. I don't know what it is, but it's something that should cause some concern to the candidates.
I tell you, we've had some pretty good little politicians around here.
Well, are you one of them?
No. We've had about 2 or 3 that's really been politicians. They're sort of slowing down, though.
Sort of fading from the scene.
Well, I don't know. They just haven't opened up yet.
Well, we've got a hot governor's race that's just cranking up in Alabama. As you know, a whole lot of candidates are running, one of the largest fields we've ever had. If their election were today, how would beat 13 go?
I couldn't say. They haven't talked around here much, have they, Roy?
You think it'll be one of the 3 Bs, Mr. Baxley, Mr. Beasley, Mr. Brewer, maybe Fob James, maybe Sid McDonald, maybe somebody else? How about Shorty Price?
Well, now everybody talks about Shorty, you know.
But you're not quite ready to tell us and tell our viewers who's going to be the next governor of Alabama.
I wouldn't do that. Couldn't do it.
And you've been voting up here ever since you were 21, you told me, and you're 74. You don't look it, but so you voted in a whole lot of governor's races, and you picked a lot of winners.
Well, I've picked some losers, but I picked a lot of winners.
And you're pretty satisfied with those that you picked?
Yeah, sure was.
Now, this is Mr. Parker over here, right, sir?
Right.
You said something a minute ago that I got to repeat on camera. You said that the fact that you're always right up here may be what's wrong in Montgomery. Maybe y'all ought to be wrong sometimes. What did you mean by that?
Well, I don't really know what I meant. It could be that we could use some better leadership down there, though.
All right, now we've got 13 candidates in the Democratic primary, 3 more in the Republican primary to choose from to get that better leadership. Now, if you were voting today, if you're going right up here where your polling place is and voting today, who would you vote for?
Well, I hadn't really made my mind up, sure.
Well, who are you leaning to?
I'm leaning to Fob James.
Why do you like Mr. James?
Well, from what I've heard about him and read about him, I just believe he's the best man for the job.
I think he's the best man for the job. Several other candidates are considered, and sometimes we're wrong about that, as leading contenders, the 3 Bs, Mr. Baxley, Mr. Beasley, Mr. Brewer. What do you think of those 3 men? How about Mr. Baxley?
Well, I just can't go with him, I don't think.
Can't go with Mr. Baxley? Well, can you go with Mr. Beasley?
No, don't believe it would.
How about Mr. Brewer?
Well, I didn't like the way he lost the last time. He lost like a little kid, I think, in the last election.
All right. What about young Sid McDonald? He's getting some mention around the state.
Well, I just wouldn't comment much on the others because I just don't know that much about
You don't know that much about him?
No, sure don't.
But you're leaning right now toward Fob James for governor. Thank you, sir. For the winning candidate.
I've always been right,
Well, all right. In that case, all we have to do is ask you who you're going to vote for September the 5th. We'll know who the next governor is.
I've got to wait and hear a lot more promises than what I've heard so far, so I don't know.
You're not quite ready to?
No.
You're undecided.
I'm very much undecided.
Tell me about Mr. Baxter.
No, I can't even. That wouldn't do to put on TV.
How about Mr. Beasley?
That wouldn't do to put on TV.
How about Mr. Brewer?
That might not do to put on TV.
Well, you qualified that a little. How about Mr. Fob James?
I don't even know that old fella, but I'm an Alabama football fan. He's an Auburn one. I'm not going to vote for him.
Roll Tide. How about Mr. Sid McDonald?
I don't even know him. I just heard about him.
I believe that we finally found Shorty Price's campaign manager right here.
You might have.
But you really don't have a feel just yet of who might carry B-13.
I sure don't.
Well, it's
I don't think anybody does.
Just 4 weeks away.
I know it, but really, I don't think anybody's made up their mind.
And you certainly haven't.
No, sir.
And you voted not in not many elections because you're not that old, but you voted in a few.
I voted in them since I was 21.
Well, we didn't say how long ago that was. Not very long ago.
I have to think about it.
And you, where do you live? Right here in the Friendship community?
Dark corner.
Dark corner. And the voters in Dark corner are in the dark right now about the government.
Oh, I think they're in Friendship too. This is the society part of Dark corner.
I have to be honest. At this point, I don't see any evidence that we're going to have a record vote by any stretch of the imagination. We voted almost 1.2 million in the presidential election of 1976. Of course, the heaviest turnout for a governor's race was 1970 in the runoff of 1,085,000. I will genuinely be surprised if we exceed 1 million votes September 5. I think it's going to be a lighter vote. I think a lot of people are going to wait till the runoff to make up their mind.
1 million votes would be something less than 50%. 45 to 52.
It would be around 52. We have about 1.9 million, round figure, registered voters in Alabama as of March 1. So it would be right around 55% of the vote. So you hadn't made up your mind yet? You're not even leaning toward any of them yet?
Not yet. I don't know. It's a little hard to say at this point. Since how there's not a Wallace in it for the first time in so long.
Well, if the election were today, the primary today, how would you vote?
I hadn't fully made up my mind.
Not even leaning toward anybody yet?
Well, you know, they say that a person generally votes against someone.
All right.
Well, I'm trying to take a positive approach in this election and not vote against anyone, but rather to vote for. So.
You're studying them real carefully.
Yes, sir. I think so.
Well, let's just run down, if I might, the names of the people that are generally considered the leading candidates and just let you kind of react to each one of them. Bill Baxter.
I've heard some very favorable comment on Mr. Baxter.
Jerry Beasley.
Yes, sir. Probably Mr. Beasley.
Albert Brewer.
That's another one I've heard some very favorable comment on.
Bob James.
Well, he's working pretty hard. They say that he's sort of a newcomer, and he's a name that they are having to deal with now rather than recalling past, maybe, exposure.
Of course, he's from nearby, over in Opelika, not too far from here. He might give him some support in this area. How about young Sid McDonald, who is being talked about a whole lot lately? You know much about Mr. McDonald?
No, sir, not enough to make a judgment on him.
But you're not quite ready to tell us which way you're leaning today.
No, sir, because I honestly don't know.
You're not leaning yet. You're still one of that large percent of undecided voters.
Well, you know, we got quite a selection running this time. Many offices are vacant. So I think it's probably something that all of us as voters need to really give a lot of careful consideration to.
Who are you going to be for governor?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know yet.
There is an alarming, perhaps lack of interest and certainly a hesitance on the part of the voters to really make up their mind who they're going to vote for. We found very few here today who were willing to say, yes, I am for Mr. X or Mr. Y or Mr. Z. They're still going to wait a little longer. Want to hear one of them said a few more promises. Perhaps facetiously they said that, but nonetheless, if Beat 13 is typical, then there's a large undecided vote in Alabama.
You had an anti-politician or anti-politics feeling?
Very strong. I read this into all of them, and some of them express this sentiment rather harshly. They're all a bunch of liars, a bunch of promises that they never keep. I think what we've seen today is typical not only of Alabama, but I fear of the whole nation, that there is a suspicion by the public toward anyone associated with politics. And I think it's rather sad. It may be justified, but it's nonetheless, it's a sad commentary, but it's there. We've been up here today talking to your mamas and daddies and grandmamas and granddaddies trying to find out who's going to win the governor's race and beat 13, and we hadn't gotten a whole lot of good answers. I think I'll conduct a poll of you 5. How many of you in here are for Mr. Baxley? No votes for Mr. Baxley. How many for Mr. Beasley? 1 vote for Mr. Beasley. Another vote for Miss Beasley. How many for Mr. Brewer? Mr. Brewer gets shut out. How about Mr. Bob James? There's a vote and another vote. Well, that gets them all then, because there are no votes left. So it looks like it's going to be a runoff between Mr. Beasley and Mr. Bob James for governor. You think that's about what it's going to be?
I don't know. I don't know how it'll go, tell you the truth.
No longer do the voters see the strawberry pickers band and the suds and mop buckets and rallies associated with any political campaign of James Big Jim Folsom. The 69-year-old former governor, who is now blind, is campaigning for the office he has occupied twice by holding a series of news conferences. Folsom says he has never been beaten in a political race, only defeated. He is presently concentrating on the big cities, accompanied by his wife, Jamel, who reads his platform before the former governor goes into a question and answer period. Folsom says he stands today for what he has stood for all his political life: 3 strong branches of government.
That's the only issue. The other issue is on the books, and I'm running on that record. Of course, I'm going to improve that record. But the issue is a 3-branch issue, and these lawyers are not going to stand up for it. You can write that in the book.